Hey y'all, thanks for giving me the opportunity to present on climate change and the Inflation Reduction Act. This presentation is a work in progress because rollout of the Inflation Reduction Act is ongoing. Between strengthening storms, wildfires, ocean heating, and deadly heat, climate change is making itself felt. In the next few slides, I'd like to highlight a few critical impacts that are changing the world. These impacts make climate action imperative, and the Inflation Reduction Act is a great way to work towards success. A tipping point represents a sudden change in a system resulting from a buildup of smaller, almost unnoticeable changes. When climate tipping points are distributed about the planet and are linked together, the linkages can mean that the sudden changes in one tipping point can lead to a cascade of changes globally. The climate system does contain global-scale tipping points which are interconnected. Antarctica, at the bottom of the world, is home to the Thwaites Glacier and the larger West Antarctic ice sheet. This graphic shows the contribution of meltwater from western Antarctica from 2008 to 2015. Now, for perspective, between 2017 and 2020, Greenland averaged about 283 billion tons of melting ice a year, and that rate continues to increase. Over the same time period, Antarctica averaged about 127 billion tons a year, less than half of Greenland's annual average loss. But the Thwaites Glacier is a wild card. In December 2021, scientists reported that the Thwaites Glacier will likely collapse in the next 5 to 10 years. The Thwaites' eastern ice shelf hangs over the ocean. Warming ocean waters are melting the shelf from beneath, are helping loosen the grip of support which the seafloor provides in spots to the shelf, and the shelf is fracturing, which means it becomes structurally weaker and more able to disconnect from the glacier, which is supported by the continent on which the glacier rests. In the case that the Thwaites ice shelf collapses into the ocean, scientists believe that would mark a tipping point for the West Antarctic ice sheet. The ice shelf helps hold back the rest of the Thwaites Glacier, and the glacier holds back the rest of the West Antarctic ice sheet. If Thwaites were to melt, global sea level rise would rise about 2 feet. If the interconnected neighboring glaciers cannot hold back the West Antarctic ice sheet, global sea levels could rise almost 11 feet. So the Thwaites Glacier represents a tipping point which, if the ice shelf is lost, global consequences result. This graphic contains the elements you'll see in an upcoming video clip. First, let's look at the legend in the lower left-hand corner of the graphic. At the top of the legend, you'll notice the icons for regional elements and for global elements. Tipping points in global systems cascade due to the interconnectivity of global elements at risk. Those global elements are shown in the solid circles, color-coded as you see in the legend by the likelihood of reaching a tipping point as global average temperatures increase due to climate change. As we approach an average global temperature increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius, those global elements shown with a solid red circle background become most likely. Let's look briefly at the interconnected global elements listed as the Greenland ice sheet, Labrador-Erminger Seas convection, and the West Antarctic ice sheet. In the Earth's polar regions, ocean water forms sea ice. Ice locked up in glaciers, sea ice, and the polar ice caps is freshwater. As ice forms from freezing seawater, the salt is left behind in the surrounding ocean. As the cold seawater gets saltier, its density increases and it starts to sink. Surface water is pulled in to replace the sinking water, which, as long as sea ice formation continues, eventually becomes cold and salty enough to sink. This initiates the deep ocean currents, driving the global ocean pattern of ocean currents in the Atlantic. Eventually, the water gets pulled back up towards the surface and warms up in a process called upwelling, completing the cycle. In the Atlantic, off the Florida coast, you can see the Gulf Stream, part of this circulatory system, carrying warmer water to the British Isles, keeping their winter temperatures moderate. But if the planet continues to warm, fresh water from melting ice at the poles would slow or even stop this circulation, due in part to reductions in the concentration of salt in the ocean near the freezing seawater, which would in turn slow the sinking of the cold, salty seawater, as well as due to a slowing of ocean ice formation. With that in mind, I'd like to present a brief excerpt from a presentation given during the February 18, 2023 World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. The speaker is Dr. Jan Rockström, director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research.
These are the 16 tipping elements, the large biophysical systems that we have scientific evidence that regulates the state of the entire climate system on Earth. 9 of these 16 are showing signs of instability. Push them too far, and they will shift over from supporting humanity to starting to undermine humanity. 2 of them, the Greenland ice sheet and the West Antarctic ice sheet, together represent 10 meters sea level rise. This shows scientifically that 1.5 degrees Celsius is a physical limit. It is not a political target. Here's the one that is most researched. Greenland ice sheet, accelerated melting, warming 4 times faster than the planet as a whole, releasing cold fresh water, slowing down the overturning of heat in the North Atlantic, pushing the whole monsoon system down further south, causing droughts and forest fires over the Amazon rainforest, 1 more tipping element system, locking warm surface water in the Southern Ocean, accelerating the melting of the West Antarctic ice sheet. The North Pole is connected to the South Pole in regulating the stability of the entire Earth system. Dear friends, scientifically, this is not a climate crisis. We are now facing something deeper. Mass extinction, air pollution, undermining ecosystem functions, really putting humanity's future at risk. This is a planetary crisis. Dear friends, scientifically, this is not a climate crisis. We are now facing something deeper. Mass extinction, air pollution, undermining ecosystem functions, really putting humanity's future at risk. This is a planetary crisis.
And then, on August 16, 2022, Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act allocates $369 billion to climate solutions and energy security. The investments are likely to be far larger than that in the total amount of money, and one of the factors that determines how much money will go into climate solutions as a result of this law is how quickly all of us push the cities and counties and states and businesses and individuals and others to take advantage of the opportunities for change found in this act. In addition to the IRA, we have the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the BIL, which allocates about $1.2 trillion to a variety of infrastructure projects, some of which have environmental benefits. We'll see the BIL mentioned later. My focus here today is the IRA. If you take a look at how much money has been spent and allocated through tax expenditures for climate solutions for a long time, the overall spending was fairly low, particularly compared to what it should have been. But now look at the difference under these laws. I've included the CHIPS Act, and like the BIL, it has some provisions that are relevant to climate as well, but we'll be focusing mainly on the IRA. The historical perspective for greenhouse gas reductions is sobering. If you look at the emissions, they've been going down for a variety of reasons. We have made a little bit of progress. But if you look at what would continue in the way of reductions under current policy, it's not nearly enough. But with the Inflation Reduction Act, we get much closer to the target for 2030 in the Paris Agreement. So we need to do more, but we need to start by fully implementing these historic laws and the programs they just made available to us. Here's a look at investments by sector and the level of pollution reductions those investments are designed to create. And you can see the reductions which consumers are anticipated to create by their participation in this vital process. The complexity of the plan and the requirements for vast citizen support and participation show both the need for outreach, like this presentation, and the need for those consumer-based reduction incentives. For those interested in a deeper dive into the details of the IRA, I would offer this document, a user guide to the Inflation Reduction Act, how new investments will deliver good jobs, climate action, and health benefits, from the Blue-Green Alliance. The following definitions are taken from the Blue-Green Alliance user guide. How is the IRA's funding distributed? Funds for a formula grant are automatically awarded to all eligible applicants and are distributed according to a formula or fixed set of criteria usually written into the enabling legislation. The formula dictates whether an entity is eligible for funds, and if so, how much. If an applicant meets the formula, the award is automatic, not competitive. Formula grants are typically awarded to either state or local governments. With formula grants, the federal government dictates how the money is spent. A block grant is awarded to a government entity to fulfill a broad set of government functions. In the case of a federal block grant, the government defines a set of functions to be carried out, and then the awards grants to state or local governments to carry out those functions at their own discretion. For example, within the Inflation Reduction Act, the Environmental and Climate Justice Block Grant can be used for community-led monitoring and remediation of emissions, mitigating the effects of urban heat islands, and facilitating the engagement of disadvantaged communities in federal and state policymaking. A discretionary grant, also called a competitive grant, is a grant in which awardees are chosen among a pool of applicants and based on a review process. The review process will generally involve a set of fixed criteria based on the grant program, funding agency, or specific request for proposal. But it will also most likely involve some degree of subjective judgment. State and local government agencies, private companies, nonprofits, labor unions, and individual people may be eligible applicants, depending on the grant program. The awarding agency sets a timeline for the award's submission and competition, which may be in months or years. Broadly, loans are pools of government funding that are expected to be paid back, unlike grants. There are a number of loan programs included in the Inflation Reduction Act, but I won't spend time on these as they are critical to clean energy and manufacturing investments. The public would not generally be involved in the IRA loan processes. Tax credits fall into two broad categories, refundable and non-refundable. A refundable tax credit can be used to generate a federal tax refund larger than the amount of tax paid throughout the year. A non-refundable tax credit can only offset taxes owed and not increase an applicant's federal refund. There are two principal programs offering rebates: home energy performance-based, whole house rebates, provide rebates to homeowners for a host of home improvements, including insulation updates, heating, ventilation, air conditioning system updates and replacements, and retrofits that save whole house energy use. Larger rebates would be available for lower-income program participants. High-efficiency electric home rebate are electrification rebates for qualified and efficient homes. Heat pumps, stoves, insulation, etc. The majority of rebates designed for tribal and low-income communities are called, quote, qualified electrification project, unquote. Rebates target low and middle-income households. This slide was taken from a June 7, 2023 B session of the San Antonio City Council briefing on sustainability and climate initiatives, including IRA funding taken up by the city. I'm using this slide to illustrate formula as well as competitive grant funding programs and awards under the IRA. An example of an IRA formula grant is shown as Phase 1 of the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. The city did apply for, but did not compete. They qualified and were awarded a non-competitive $1 million planning grant to develop strong climate pollution reduction strategies for the Metropolitan Statistical Area, the MSA. The grant funding is to be used to develop a Priority Climate Action Plan, due March 1, 2024. It will list near-term implementation-ready priority greenhouse gas reduction measures. In October 2019, the city approved their Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, so this money will be used to update the CAP and consult with the rest of the Metropolitan Statistical Area, an 8-county area with Bexar at the center, and the 7 counties sharing a border with Bexar County. Those counties are Atascosa, Bandera, Bexar, Comal, Guadalupe, Kendall, Medina, and Wilson. An example of an IRA competitive grant is shown in Phase 2, the implementation phase of the same grant. Phase 1 winners submit their Priority Climate Action Plan, which is judged competitively. Phase 2 grant winners will produce a comprehensive climate action plan by 2025, listing all significant greenhouse gas sources and sinks for all sectors and near and long-term greenhouse gas emission reduction goals and strategies. During the June 7, 2023 B session, the City of San Antonio announced that they were awarded a block grant totaling over $1.2 million. As I described before, for federal block grants, here the government defines a set of functions to be carried out and then awards grants to state or local governments to carry out those functions at their own discretion. The block grant is to reduce energy use, reduce fossil fuel emissions, improve energy efficiency, and address inequity. You can see how the city is proposing to spend those funds, and will be asking for approval by City Council on the choice of projects. You may remember that I spoke earlier of the Environmental and Climate Justice Block Grant, which can be used for community-led monitoring and remediation of emissions, mitigating the effects of urban heat islands, and facilitating the engagement of disadvantaged communities in federal and state policymaking. This slide is again from the June 7, 2023 B session and shows this key program is not yet funded. It is not clear to me which government agency will be distributing funds from this block grant within San Antonio. This remains a key area for me to understand. This slide is from the June 7, 2023 B session and highlights a coming IRA program. The Neighborhood Access and Equity Grant Program awards grants to state and local governments to improve community walkability and connectivity through the removal, retrofitting, or replacement of roads and highways. The city staff has emphasized to council they will be watching for the program Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO. One kind of tax credit under the IRA depends on whether or not an individual pays taxes. To earn personal tax credits through the IRA, you must pay income tax. However, the tax credits under the IRA, beyond personal tax credits, are more expansive. For example, as the Blue-Green Alliance user guide states it, the Inflation Reduction Act includes investment tax credits, dollar-for-dollar credits to offset expenses for investments in renewable energy projects and the build-out of manufacturing facilities to produce parts and material for clean energy projects and clean vehicles. And even more broadly, tax credits fall into 2 broad categories, refundable and non-refundable. A refundable tax credit can be used to generate a federal tax refund larger than the amount of tax paid throughout the year. A non-refundable tax credit can only offset taxes owed and not increase an applicant's federal refund. Therefore, a refundable tax credit can guarantee a benefit and a non-refundable credit cannot. The Blue-Green Alliance User Guide is a good resource to further understand how tax credits and deductions are expected to work. The Internal Revenue Service itself is the best place to find updates on credits available through the IRS. Google the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, for example, to find out information on the latest offerings. At this time, rebates must await the writing of federal and, in most cases, state rules. Visit rewiringamerica.org, where you will find the IRA Savings Calculator. With a few simple inputs about your income, location, and homeowner status, the calculator will give a quick estimate of the incentive level available for homeowners, both through tax credits and rebates. Thank you for joining me.